So Krystal Webber is here with us today. Krystal leads the IBM Blockchain Services Global Design and Strategy Discipline, leveraging the power of blockchain-enabled transactions. Her team consults with clients all over the world to accelerate transformation of their business models, business ecosystems, and business processes for everything from food safety, real estate and trade finance, to education, insurance, and medical services. So really all across the board. Prior to joining IBM Blockchain, Krystal served as a global design lead for IBM's cognitive process services practice, where under her leadership, the organization was consistently recognized as the #1 design thinking provider in the world. So exciting. She spent nearly a decade working at both traditional and digital agencies, focusing on public relations, marketing, and user experience before coming to IBM in 2015. So Krystal is going to kick us off here today with designing enterprise blockchain networks. So Krystal, when you can, go ahead and start.
All right, excellent. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys and hopes that we get this right here. Let's see. How about now? Can you guys see my screen okay? Do you see the full set of slides?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. And you can see full slides and not presenter view, just making sure my technology is set up correctly. Okay, fantastic. So what I am going to do today is talk a little bit more, like Ashton said, about designing blockchain networks. So I know we've got a whole lot of different types of folks on the phone, and I'm going to try to speak a little bit to those who are new to blockchain or enterprise blockchain, and to those who are seasoned professionals as well. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to ask them in the app. We will get to them at the end and go into any more detail wherever it makes sense. To get us started, I want to speak a little bit to the question that we get all of the time for those in the enterprise space, particularly for you guys who might be new to the enterprise space. One conversation that we're having with clients quite frequently before we get anywhere down the line is, why do I need blockchain to solve my problem? And so there's a lot of different ways to think about this, but the reality is that business imperatives today really make blockchain an attractive enabler for enterprises that are seeking any level of business transformation, whether that's the front office or the back office. One of the things that we're seeing more and more is that we are moving from an economy of what we would call bilateral relationships, or one-to-one, when we talk about businesses interacting with each other, to an economy of multilateral relationships. So companies working together in ecosystems with multiple organizations at a time. Supply chains are such a good example of this. Beyond that, beyond the idea that we're working together differently, we really see this disruption in trust right now. So misinformation and fraud really feel rampant, and trust becomes really paramount to these companies that are interacting and transacting with each other. Beyond that, we see a huge proliferation in data. You know, everybody's heard the phrase, data is the new oil, right? And that proliferation of data, even beyond that, the new mechanisms to monetize that data are really creating these business opportunities that weren't possible before. So with these things in mind, I think it's not really a surprise that the landscape of business competition is changing too. New cross-functional, cross-industry collaborations are becoming increasingly common. In fact, they're a differentiator in a lot of markets. So we really believe that the future of the way that businesses interact with each other are going to look more like a network of networks in the future than the more traditional economy of enterprises that we have today. And so all of these factors all at once kind of set the business atmosphere for why blockchain could be such a great enabler for businesses. So when we talk about blockchain in this context and in this space, we really want to understand why blockchain is great for businesses. We know a lot about the public applications and the end consumers, but in a business world, why might some of our leaders choose this technology, especially over traditional technologies that exist today? So blockchain for business is inherently about creating trust in these multilateral relationships, in these ecosystems of enterprises. And that trust gets reinforced by many of blockchain's technical features. So things like the shared ledger, like smart contracts or chain code, provenance and immutability, consensus algorithms. So blockchain makes sense when there's a need for any of those defining features. Beyond that, we talked a little bit in the previous slide about how valuable data is becoming. And a lot of time there's this desire for decentralized control of an organization's data. That's what really makes blockchain-based platforms a smart alternative to traditional platform businesses. I mean, think about Facebook. Large enterprises are effectively giving away a lot of their data to a centralized and quite frankly, powerful intermediary like Facebook. And so platforms that are blockchain based and allow these companies to retain ownership of their data and retain some power around it are very, very attractive for the economy of the future and opportunities to take advantage of that. So, let's assume that we've established that blockchain makes sense to solve our particular business problem. The next question is always, what happens now? What do we do? And so at IBM, we have worked with hundreds of clients. We've launched dozens of production networks, and we've found a lot of success in getting these enterprise ecosystems to scale. We've done that through something that we call blockchain network design. And so my intent here today is to talk you through what we mean when we say blockchain network design and how we can be more intentional about what we're building. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the term design. We are, I would say, at peak design in the enterprise right now. It's a hot topic in a lot of circles. But the reality is that design means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In fact, our clients are often surprised when we share with them the dictionary definition of design, which is the purpose, planning, or intention that exists behind an action, fact, or material object. And when we shorten that at IBM, we like to say design is about the intent behind an outcome. And this is really, really critical to the way that we approach all of the work that we do with our clients and all of the blockchain networks that we intend to take to scale. So with that in mind, we find ourselves asking pretty much every time, what does it mean to be intentional about our success in blockchain in particular? And there's a few fundamental components, I think, compared to some of the other technologies. So firstly, we like to start by remembering that we are using blockchain technology to enable business transformation. Now, what's interesting about this is that we're doing that, but we're doing it a little bit differently than maybe in the traditional sense. Because what we are doing is enabling business transformation at the level of a market, of an industry, or of an ecosystem. And so while we've learned a lot about what it takes to build a great technology platform that's built on blockchain, I'd say we've learned even more about what it takes to build a successful and scalable business network. To think about things like creating new marketplaces, enabling that digital transformation, even building new types of business. The technology of blockchain is certainly sophisticated, but what we found is hard about building blockchain networks and blockchain business networks is the business part itself. And so we want to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Our clients really appreciate and they trust our level of experience, but they always have the same question, how do we do that? How do we account for transformation across multiple entities at an industry ecosystem at a level of a market that seems like, quite a daunting task. So at IBM, we've been thinking about what that blockchain journey looks like. Certainly, it can be a long journey. There are so many projects that we can cite today, both within our organization, but of course across the larger industry, that there are a number of projects that never make it past that proof of concept or that minimum viable product stage. Getting to scale can be tricky. So what we've done is try to break that journey into a number of different phases for how we get to scale. And so you'll see that represented here. We start with our clients in what we call the exploration phase. And in this phase, we are thinking about the problem that we're going to solve, the opportunity that we have. Is this something that blockchain is a good candidate for? And is it a viable problem that people and organizations and enterprises and ecosystems have? And if it is, then we're looking at the landscape of technology options that we have and business options as well. Should we join a network that's already existing? Perhaps we should join a network and extend the capabilities that it has even further. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to innovate. Perhaps we already have a network and we're looking to merge with another. Maybe there isn't anything that fits our need and we need to build something on our own and create a new network. So that explore phase is really about assessing the opportunity area and the problem space. As we move into envision, this is where we're starting to think about the real viability and feasibility of our solution. So we're looking at things like the business case. Is this idea financially viable? We're looking at things like the ecosystem. Are there enough players or enough interest in what we're trying to do to be able to build a community around this? And then lastly, we're confirming that we've made the right technology decision. So this is typically where we're building an MVP and we're testing out different components and figuring out what our best approach is going to be. As we move into the establish phase, this is where we're really starting to get ready for scale. So this is where we're building our pilots and doing our live integrations and running real transactions. It's at this point where we're starting to think about commercial frameworks, how we might monetize our networks. We're also thinking about operational models. How are we all going to work together? We know we're going to be bringing certainly together a set of founders, but beyond that, additional members as well. And how are they going to play into that? And then lastly, as we move into the evolve phase, this is really where we're getting things out in market for mass adoption. We're producing that revenue, we're generating those savings. We're thinking about how we onboard and attract and recruit new members. We're thinking about new features and functions and applications that we may bring to the network. Now, I think one of the things that's really important to point out here is that we're certainly demonstrating this in a linear fashion right now, but the reality is this experience really serves as a loop. What we are so often seeing at IBM is that our clients are going through this journey and they're releasing one or two applications on their network to get started and realizing that there's additional opportunity beyond that. And so we see them heading back to the beginning of this journey and thinking about additional opportunities, different types of extensions to their network, and really going through this process again. So, I think recognizing that the blockchain journey can be broken down into parts, but also can be cyclical and can continually evolve along the way is important as well. So, as we talk about all of these projects that we've done and the journey that our clients go through, one of the big things that we found is that there is 3 work streams that really comprise all successful blockchain networks. This is really a summary of what it takes to get blockchain networks to scale. And that's a combination of what we call governance design, business value design, and technology design. So we're going to dive into each one of those areas a little bit more. But at a high level, governance design is about creating a strategy and an operational model that are going to be aligned to member benefits and user outcomes that are fair, that are democratic, that are transparent, that can evolve. We talk a lot about leaving the door open for the future because the reality is that the market is still new and it's still early and things are going to change and we need to be able to adapt to that. I also want to make a point here to talk about how we really focus on outcomes that are fair for everybody in an ecosystem. And that word fair is intentional. We don't say equal. There is a perception that everybody has to get the same amount of value out of a blockchain network. And while we certainly think everybody does need to get value out of a network, it doesn't necessarily have to be equal. Instead, it's really more about getting the value that's equivalent that you put in that you're getting out. And so when we talk about value, we're also looking at, again, having outcomes that are fair versus necessarily equal. When we talk about business value design is about creating these business models that allow us to both monetize our network. So think about ways we're going to either generate revenue or perhaps generate savings. And then the incentives that we can create to drive collaboration and drive network effects. So we all know with blockchain networks and platform businesses in general, the value increases exponentially as members interact and transact with each other. And so when we talk about business value design, we're thinking about how we design the platform in such a way that it encourages mass collaboration and drives those network effects so everybody can be getting the maximum amount of value out of what we've created. And then lastly, we are talking about technology design. So I think this is the area where we see, most firms focusing nowadays. And it's true, none of us would be able to get to this point if we didn't have a strong technology enablement at its core. And so when we talk about technology design, we're talking about designing those great human-centered experiences that are going to drive adoption of our platforms. We're building new digital products, and we need to be doing that with all of the things that make up great digital products today, and that we expect, things like privacy, like trust, like security, but also things like great user experience. So when we at IBM think about taking blockchain networks to scale and all that it takes to design a successful business network, we're not only thinking about how we build this wonderful technology platform, but we're also talking and thinking about what our governance platform is going to look like and what our business value platform is going to look like and how all of these things are going to come together to make the network successful. And that's really, really important, thinking about how all of these things work with each other, because you introduce a lot of different levels of risk if you're not thinking about it that way. I mean, imagine if you've gotten all the way to creating a production technology system, but haven't thought about how you're going to produce any revenue or how you're going to continue to fund that system. That's going to be a real challenge in allowing it to grow. Or think about if you've got a great plan with all of your partners and you have 8 or 10 groups that have come together and said, we're committed to working together, we figured out how we're going to do it, we've got our operational model in place, but you have no technology product to bring anybody onto your network. So all of these things working together are really, really critical. So as we talk about those 3 key work streams, let's take a second and deep dive into each one of them. And again, I'm going to encourage you guys to ask some questions. We'll take a look at them after I wrap up in each one of these areas. I'm going to give you an overview, but certainly we can get into more specific questions as well. So the first point that I want to make is that, in these circumstances, companies are often coming together to create a capability that's outside of their core competency. So think about mining companies coming together to build blockchain platforms and banks coming together to build blockchain platforms, automobile companies. As they come together to build these blockchain platforms, they are essentially creating these mini digital product companies within their own organizations. And they're often doing that among multiple entities that may have competing priorities. So you start to introduce a lot of complexity relatively quickly. And so as you think about that dynamic and that atmosphere in which we're working and we're operating, there's a number of things to think about and a number of things to consider. And so we'll talk about some of those in more detail. We'll start with governance design, because what we have found is that when we bring business networks to scale, governance design is one of our most critical factors for success. Now, we cover a number of different strategic and operational factors when we work with clients around governance. And so we like to use the acronym BOLT to describe the 4 primary categories of blockchain governance. And those are business, operations, legal, and technology. So in the business domain, we're thinking about a number of things, like what we call the network intent. We are really helping networks understand, for what purpose do you exist? What are you trying to achieve in the future? What is your vision here? We're also thinking about things like sales and recruitment and adoption, because again, we know that exponential value is generated every time somebody new joins the platform and starts transacting. So we want to think about how we can drive that adoption. In operations, we're thinking about things like membership management. What type of members do we want to have? What are our onboarding policies? What about offboarding? So often our networks are thinking about how do we bring people in, and they're not thinking about the instances of what happens when perhaps somebody needs to leave. And so we're thinking about all those nuances as well. From a legal perspective, there's a number of different considerations. We're thinking about things like the regulatory environment. We're thinking about antitrust. We're thinking about legal structures for new consortia that are being created. And we're also thinking about things like intellectual property, the fact that there's multiple types of IP that are created on a network, and that we may need to handle all of them a little bit differently. And then lastly, when we talk about technical governance, we're thinking about things like data and security standards. We're also thinking about operational strategies for things like deployment, support, maintenance. Again, we're moving into this realm of creating digital products and digital product companies. And so companies that may not be used to it have to think about things like help desks and how that technology is going to be supported for individual users and individual enterprises within the larger ecosystem. So at a very high level, these are some of the key concepts that we're thinking about when we talk about governance as a blockchain network. So we'll talk next about business value design. And in business value design, what we're looking to do is really build a business case and develop a business model in the way that you would for any new business. In reality, all of the concepts for your standard business case, your standard business model canvas still apply here. But we have found that there are really 3 additional considerations that are unique to blockchain networks. And so we want to talk about those a little bit more here. The first is that you need to capture a market. Now, your market may be limited by regulation, but one of the things that is important here is recognizing that for maximum network effects, we need everybody in our target market to join us. Again, this is how everybody's going to reach that exponential value every time a new participant joins. We want to get that maximum return. And so to do that, we are going to have to drive some recruitment and make the platform attractive. And so enabling those network effects ultimately becomes something that we do through architecting incentives. When we talk about ecosystems and an economy of ecosystems versus what we see today, your individual success actually requires you helping firms other than yourself receive and produce value. And so when we talk about creating a business model for a blockchain network, we actually end up having a network of business cases and sometimes a combination of business models as well. We have to think about the network. We think about the network owners and those who have invested into creating the network. We also think about the business case for the participants, and also any service providers or innovators that may come on the network as well. And each one of these groups needs a compelling incentive, financial or otherwise, to encourage adoption of the platform. This is how we really drive value. So these 3 things together, in addition to all the other things it takes to create a great business model, are really important. Defining the market, enabling those network effects, and making sure that there's incentives for everybody. And then the last high-level topic I'll cover here is technology design. When we talk about technology design, it's about all of the standard things you need in today's platform: user experience, security, resiliency, compliance, all of those things that make up great platforms. But again, we're also thinking about what makes blockchain-enabled products unique. So we're considering additional questions like, how do I meet the needs of individual users, but also others on the business network? So in design thinking, we often talk about empathy for your users, but now we're also talking about empathy for our users, empathy for our enterprises, and empathy for our ecosystems. How do we design for all 3 of those things at once? And so with that in mind, how do we measure success, both for the network as a whole, but also for individual participants? What does that look like on our platform? And then we have to think about some of the technical implications as well. So is this product going to satisfy the technical requirements of a number of organizations that maybe I can't predict yet? How can I create an open system to allow us to grow as the network wants to grow and change and operate differently over time? And then lastly, our big consideration in technology is around innovation. How will we continue to innovate among partners and among competitors? How are we enabling other firms to innovate on top of what we're doing? Because again, that's how we drive those network effects, is everybody being able to contribute new value to our platform. And so when we think about technology, again, all of the things that you need to create a great platform today, plus these additional things that consider multiple enterprises and ecosystems and the network economy in which we're operating. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up there. This is at a high level what we mean when we say it's important to design enterprise blockchain networks. And I want to take a second and answer any questions that we might have from the group.
That was awesome, Krystal. Thank you so much. Yeah. I'm sure everyone else did too. Awesome. So we have a question here. I'm looking through the Hoova app right now. Right. Are public or private blockchains more important to enterprises? What do you think?
I would say it's a mix of both. Certainly, we have seen in a number of B2B instances, businesses certainly look toward private and permissioned blockchain networks, but not exclusively. And certainly a number of businesses are B2B or B2B2C. And in those cases, there is certainly a case for public networks. I would also say that we are seeing the trend or the need probably very soon in the future for us to start to see a combination of public-private hybrid networks that may involve multiple protocols. And so I think neither one of them can be ruled out for the enterprise space.
Sure. Awesome. All right. Another question here. How do you deal with the different flavors of blockchain distributions? That is saying interfacing between different blockchain implementations with partner platforms, so different partners on different platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of different types of interfacing. So I'm not sure if the question's meant from a business or a technical perspective, but I'll touch on both. I mean, certainly from a business perspective, we're interacting with our partners in a number of different ways. I mean, certainly it's a digital world now and we're all working virtually, and we're holding a lot of meetings and collaboration and what have you, in formats like this. Everybody's input is important with our partners and for our ecosystems to succeed. In fact, I would say even with our what we would call founder-led platforms, where you have one dominant player in the network really taking on the investment and the risk in building a network, you still have all of the smaller players that want to have a voice. And so we're still interfacing with them in the same way. From a technical perspective, obviously, we're working with companies as much as we can to create open platforms and APIs and different types of protocols that allow us to connect and interact with different types of platforms all the time.
Yeah, definitely. Makes a lot of sense. All right, we will answer one more question here. When is centralization versus unilateral control of data acceptable or even necessary for an enterprise product or service, if it ever is?
Yeah, good question. So this is something that I think, we always take on a network by network basis. Centralized control can make sense when things are highly regulated, for example, and perhaps there's one dominant or trusted or knighted entity to be the arbiter of trust. And in those cases, that might make sense. One of the things and the trends I think that we're seeing is, centralization is what we are used to today. And so in a lot of cases, when businesses are just starting to get off the ground, some level of centralization makes it a little bit easier with an operational plan to become more decentralized over time. And so I think that's something that I think we just have to acknowledge right now is in our transition and our growth to a fully decentralized world, there is going to be some components of centralization, at least as we get started. And perhaps those continue over time, but I think you start to see the models evolve as everybody starts to grow and change.
Actually, there's one more question I want to ask. I think it's pretty good. How do we get skilled and trusted developers to create our products?
Yeah, so this is such a great question too, because I have so many people ask me about how do we break into blockchain. The reality is, as much as we live in the blockchain circles and we see it every day, it is still a relatively new discipline, and there's a lot of space for people to be coming in. When we talk about talent that already exists and getting trusted people, I mean, certainly there's a number of external alliances and certifications and things that you can work out, take a look at. But one of the things I think at IBM is we look for the soft skills in addition to the hard skills. So, we want to see your experience building networks, certainly, if not in blockchain, then other similar technologies. But beyond that, how are you operating in this new collaborative environment? So I think even for developers who are used to being kind of behind the computer and behind the scenes, this mindset of being open and being collaborative and interacting with other organizations is a really important component to this idea of how we build trust and we build technology platforms that essentially instantiate a lot of the human elements that we're trying to get across in these ecosystems, right? Technology is an enabler for that. And so the more that we can have blockchain development talent that enables or embodies those principles, I think the more effective our platforms are going to be.
Definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, this session was awesome. Thank you so much for being here again. Make sure you follow Krystal, thank her for her talk because it was amazing, and go ahead and check out IBM Blockchain as well. They do amazing work. They post a lot of great content. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Anybody, please feel free to reach out. I'll be on the app answering your questions. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Yeah. Digital claps for her.
Take care.